Okay, in this video, I'm showing you how to fill out the N400, this application for U.S. citizenship. Okay, so if you go to the part one here, the first thing they ask you is your 9-digit A number. Now, you can find this number on your green card or permanent residency card. You'll see a 9-digit number, and that's the number that you put in here. Now, they give you, in part one, item number one, they give you 5 choices. Um, if you got your green card through some type of employment, then that would be part A here. If you got your green card through marriage, then it would be part B. If you got your green card through a U.S. citizen um, who is living abroad because of either they're in the military or they're working for the U.S. government, then you would click here for number C. And if you're got your U.S. citizenship through joining the U.S. military in certain circumstances, you can join the U.S. military. If that's the case and you got your green card through there, you would pick choice D. Choice E is for other ways you have gotten your green card. Um, and we won't get into that. So part two, item number one, you put your name, and usually I put my last name in capital and then my first and middle in uh, um, just regular characters. And then here, item number two, you uh, type your name exactly as it's shown on your green card or permanent resident card. So you put that there, last, first, and middle. If you use any other names, nicknames or maiden names, then you would list it here. Okay. And for item number four, if you want to legally change your name on your green card, then you would click yes, and then you will fill out the name that you want changed to. Mind you that you would have to go and legally change all your names then on your other identification cards, like your driver license and whatever. Um, Here, if you have a social security number, you would put your social security number here. If you have a USCIS account number, this number you would get if you previously filed an N400 and you're going to reference it to that previous filing, then you would have a number here. If this is your first time filing, then you wouldn't have any number, so you would just skip it and leave it blank. Here you would put item number 7 and 8, you would put your gender and your birthday and the day you became a lawful permanent resident. You can find this date here on your green card or on your permanent resident card. Okay. And then you would put in the country of your birth, the country you were born, and the country that you are a citizen, currently a citizenship of. Okay. Okay, and item number 12, they ask you if you have a mental or physical disability uh, that prevents you from doing the English civics test. If you say yes, you need to also submit a form N648, and you need to have this form signed by a doctor saying that you're not able to take the English civics test because of your disability. Okay, in most cases, people would say no, and then you would go on. There are some exceptions to the English language test or the English civics test. If you're over 50 years old and you've lived in the United States as a lawful permanent resident, then you're exempted. The other condition is if you're 55 years old and older and lived in the United States for 15 years as a permanent resident, then you're also exempted. And finally, if you're 65 years and older and you've lived in the United States as a lawful permanent resident for a total of 20 years, then you're also exempted. Okay. Here, this is to ask you whether you have a disability that you need accommodation for when you're taking the test. So if you answer yes, you would click either A, B, or C. Um, you would click here if you're deaf or hard of hearing. If you're blind, you click B. If you have some other type of disability that you need accommodation for, and here they give you an example, a wheelchair, then you would pick C. In most cases, most people would answer no. Here you would put your phone number, you have an evening number, and if you have your email address, you would put it here. If your work number, if any, or a cell phone number, you would put here. Okay, then part 5, item number 1, you have to list all your addresses during the last 5 years. So any place that you lived in for the last 5 years, you would put this information here. So you would first start off with your most recent, your current physical address. You put the address, street, and county, and state. And then you list here how long you've lived there. If your current, and then item number B is if you would list your current mailing address if it's different from your physical address. So if you have a mailing address that is different, then you would fill out number B, item B. If not, you would just leave it blank. C is another physical address. If you lived here, if you lived in another place uh, since the last 5 years, then you would list that address here. Notice that this date here has to be has to match this date here. This date has to be a continuation of this date here. If you don't have this continuation, or if there's a gap between where you lived here and you lived up here, you're likely to get an RFE because the USCIS is going to want to know where you were living between those two gaps if you don't have a continuation from here, from this address and your most recent address. Okay, so there has to be a continuation. Okay, so if you have a third address, you would list it here, and of course you would have to have a continuation from this third address to your second address, and then so forth with your fourth address. Here they ask you information about your parents. If your parents is a United States citizen, then you would answer this question here, item number 1 and 2. Uh, if your parents are not U.S. citizens, then you can skip this part and go to part number 7. So let's assume both your parents are not citizen. If they are, you would fill this out here, and you would fill out the father information here. So you would just go to part 7 if both your parents are not U.S. citizen. You would go to part 7 and you answer your ethnic background and your physical characteristics. Here they ask you what your ethnicity is. If you're not a Hispanic, you click not a Hispanic or Latino. And then here you would pick your race, whether white, Asian, black, or American Indian or Hawaiian. And you list your height here and the weight in pounds. You check off your eye color, hair color, and then you will go on to part 8. And here you list the last 5 years, whether you've attended school or if you worked for the last 5 years. So if you were employed or you went to school, then you would list it here. Here let's assume, let's say in our case that John Doe had worked at McDonald's, and this is the address of the employment where he worked and the date that he worked and the occupation. Okay. So if you have another employer within the last 5 years or school, then you would list it here. Okay. And here, same thing. Okay. And part 9, item numbers 1, 2, and 3. This is where they ask you how long you've been outside of the United States during the last 5 years. You have to list the total number of days that you were outside the United States. Um, Here and how many trips you took outside the United States. So let's say from 2014 of December till January, we were in Canada for 30 days. And let's say you were in from February 2017 to from 10th to 25th, you were in Mexico for 15 days. So if it's more than 6 months, you would check yes. Here, since it's less than 6 months, you would check no. Now, if you haven't kept a record of how long you've been or the dates that you were outside the United States, there is a way to check it up, and we'll go through that in another video. But in this case, if you remember or you have a record, you would put it there. Part 10, item number 1 is whether they ask you married or status, and you pick married, divorced. If you've never been married, then you would pick single. If you've never been married, and if you're married, then let's assume in our case we're married. So you're married, so you would click off married. And if you are married, they ask you if your spouse is in the U.S. Armed Forces. Okay, if they are, then you need to click off yes. If it's no, you just say no. And they ask you how many times you've been married. Okay, let's assume in our case you've been married 1 time. Okay, then you list your current spouse here. Okay, the name. If the current spouse had previous name, like a maiden name, then you would put it here. If your current spouse has nicknames, you would also put it here. Then they ask you your current spouse's date of birth and when you got married. They ask you the current spouse's home address, so you would put the home address here. And the employer, if your current spouse is currently working, you would put it here. Okay. They ask you, is your current spouse a U.S. citizen? Well, here in our case, we would say yes because you got your green card through marriage, so you would pick yes. And if your current spouse is a U.S. citizen, how did she or he became a U.S. citizen? Let's assume that your spouse became a current citizen by birth. Okay, if it was some through other way, then you would put other, and you have to list the date your spouse became a U.S. citizen. Okay. If your spouse is not a U.S. citizen, then you would put that information here. You'll also, if she is not a U.S. citizen but a green card holder, then she will also have an A number, and you can check. You can find this number on her green card. Then they ask you if your current spouse's immigration status, whether she or he is a lawful permanent resident or some other way, legal way that they are staying here. Okay, so item number 8A, they ask you if your current spouse had a prior spouse. So if your spouse was married before, then you would put that person's name here. They also ask you here on part number 8, how many times your current spouse has been married. So if he or she has been married more than once, then you put 2 or 3 or whatever, the number of marriage, and then you would put their previous spouse's name down here. And then they ask you if your spouse's prior spouse, what their status is. They're asking this question basically determine, to see how your spouse got her green card if she's not a U.S. citizen. So that's what they're trying to determine here. So you put the date of your current spouse's prior spouse, the birth date, and the country of birth, and the country of citizen. So you would put all that. Okay, so part 10, item number F and H, they ask you about your spouse's prior spouse and when they got married and also when the marriage ended. And they also ask you about how the marriage ended. So here we're talking about your spouse's uh, previous marriage. Uh, and then item number 9, item 9A, here they're asking information about your previous spouse. So they ask you for the name of your previous, if you've been married before your current marriage, and then you have to list your previous spouse's uh, name and his or her immigration status, and when the marriage ended. So this item B is your previous spouse's immigration status when your marriage ended. Now they're asking all this question is the reason is because they're looking for marriage fraud, whether there was some type, whether you got your green card or whether your spouse got her green card, his or her green card through marriage fraud. So that's what they're checking up on. So um, make sure if there was no fraud, you answer everything truthfully. And here, item C and D, they ask for your previous spouse's date of birth and country of birth. So they're gonna check all this information with their immigration record they have on file. And what they're again looking for is if there's been some type of marriage fraud. And then you put your previous spouse's or prior spouse's country of citizenship and the date you were previously married and when the marriage was ended. Okay, and how it was ended. Okay, here we go to information about your children. So part 11 is about your children. So if you have any children, you will list them here, and you put your child's name here, um, the birth date and the country of birth, where they live, the address of your child, and how they're related to you. Okay, if you have more than one child, then you would list it here. Their name, the birth date, the country of birth, and the address, and how they're related to you. And if you have a third child, you continue on. Okay, and you have a fourth child, and you would list it here. Okay, here they're asking for specific questions. Okay, here they ask you specific questions, and what they're looking for is to determine whether you violated any type of U.S. laws or um, whether you are a person of what they call a good moral character. Okay, so the first item here, part 12, item number 1 is asking you if you ever claim to be a U.S. citizen in any way. If you said yes, that could uh, cause problems. You need to see an attorney for this because you can be denied because this would be like fraud. If you claim to be a U.S. citizen and you are not a U.S. citizen, then that would be like you might have committed a fraud. So you need to see a lawyer about this. If you register vote for a state, federal, if as a permanent resident, you're not supposed to vote. So if you did register or if you did voted, you need to go see an attorney. Okay. Um, Here they ask you again, do you have any type of hereditary title or nobility in a foreign country? So if you have some type of um, high, like if you're have some type of status in a foreign country, then You would say yes, and you would have to explain what type of title you have. Uh, you might, you need to see an attorney because you might have to file a waiver for this. It depends on what type of title you had or what type of status you had. So um, you need to see an attorney if you say yes to either one of these. Um, Item number 5 is whether you have some kind of mental disability, or you have some kind of mental disease. If you say yes, you should also see an attorney. Here, they ask you if you owe any taxes. Okay, um, you're supposed to file a tax every year, except for if you have zero income. Okay, so if you did, if you do owe federal taxes or state or local taxes, you need to pay those taxes. You shouldn't um, be filing this unless you fix that first. Okay, so you should go back and pay all your taxes before you actually file for this application. Have you ever not filed in this case, let's say you do have to file all your taxes, unless, of course, again, if you have zero income. If that's the case, if you have zero income and you didn't need to file any taxes, you would say yes, and you would have to just explain that during the interview that you weren't required to file any tax because you had zero income. If you did say yes, did you consider yourself as non-U.S. resident, and is that the reason why you didn't file taxes? If you say yes to this, this could cause a problem, because you being a permanent resident means that you are a U.S. resident, and so you should be saying, uh, so you should have, as a green card holder, you should have filed all your taxes in the U.S. If you haven't, you need to see a attorney or fix it. Okay, if you've item number 8 is asking you whether you've considered yourself a non-U.S. resident. Well, if you're a permanent resident or a green card holder, you are a U.S. resident. But if you, for some reason, you consider yourself a non-U.S. resident, and that's how you filed it on your tax return, then this could be kind of conflicting. So if you did file it as a non-U.S. resident, you need to see an attorney about it and have it fixed somehow. Have you ever been a member of a club or society, association? You need to list all your memberships here. So let's say let's say in this case you went to church, so I would say yes, and you would just list the church, your name of the church group, and purpose of the church, how long you've been going there, and if you have any other memberships that you would put it here. Okay. Now, if you have a membership that um, the U.S. government might consider like a terrorist group or whatever, then you need to go see an attorney. Okay. Here, number item 10, they ask you if you've been a communist party, if you've been a member of the Communist Party or Totalitarian Party or a terrorist organization. Um, if you said yes to any of these, you need to see an attorney. The fact that you were a Communist Party doesn't mean that you would be your application will be denied. It's that I mean a lot of people from China have gotten their U.S. citizenship. It's just that if you've been a active member or in a high position in the Communist Party, that might cause a problem. So if you're just a regular member and you didn't really participate in the party, then shouldn't be any problem. Have you ever advocated item numbers? Have you advocated the overthrow of any government by force? If you say yes to this could cause a problem. You need to see an attorney. Have you ever been prosecuted? Have you ever prosecuted any person because of race or religion? If you say yes, that you can also cause a problem on your application. You need to see an attorney. And item number 13 has to do with the Nazi government, or whether you've been a Nazi member or whatever. If that's the case, you also need to see an attorney. If you committed any of these, genocide, torture, bad forcing, any of these, then you need to also see an attorney. If you said no, then you're fine. For item number 15, if you been a member or if you served or helped in the military unit parallel. Now some of these, if you have, it's okay. Um, if you've been in like a guerrilla group, and that could be a problem. Uh, it depends on what the group was doing. Okay. Um, it depends on what the you as a member, what type of if you were in the U.S. Let's say you were a military in your own home country, you joined the army. That should be no problem. But if you join some type of paramilitary unit that did some illegal stuff, then that would be a problem. So it depends on your situation. If you're not sure, you need to see an attorney. Here they ask you if you've been to prison, if you've been to detention, or whatever. If you said yes to any of these, then you also need to see an attorney. Um, because it becomes uh, more complicated, and you might have to file a waiver, or um, so your case doesn't your case becomes much more complicated. Uh, so if you for the item number 17, if you have been any part of a group that used weapons against another person or threatened to do so, if you said yes to any of these, then you need to see an attorney. If you ever sold weapons, or if you answer to any of these yes, also you need to see an attorney. Okay, so if you've been to any type of military, paramilitary, if you, item number 20 is if you used any persons under 15 years of age uh, to serve or help in the armed. Also, if you said yes, you need to see an attorney. Number 21, um, you also need to see an attorney. Here, they ask you about any criminal record that you might have. Um, Now, a lot of people have speeding tickets or minor traffic tickets. If that's the case, you also need to list that here. So let's say I did speeding. Let's say you did speeding on 2013, okay, and you just paid a fine. Then this you would say no to this, but you would say yes to 23 and 24. Um, if you have like a traffic ticket, then you would say yes, and you would write it down here. Okay. Same thing as number 24. If you have a traffic ticket, it will also say yes and list it down here. If you have a more serious crime, then you also need to list it here and go see an attorney. Okay. Speeding tickets, minor traffic violations are not a problem. However, if you've been in jail, it can complicate things, and you need to see an attorney. Um, for number 25, you would say no, even if you have a speeding ticket. So for minor traffic, you would just say no, because you've not been convicted of any crime or offense. Okay, number 26, have you placed in a rehab? Uh, if you have, um, you might have to see an attorney. If you say no, you're fine. Have you been had a suspended sentence for again, if you said yes, you need to see an attorney. If you said no, you're fine. If you've been to jail, also you need to see an attorney. Okay, because this can complicate things. Okay, so if you said no to all these, then you're fine. If you just have a speeding ticket or minor traffic ticket, then you're fine. So let's go into that here. They ask you about um, you've been prostitute or a habitual drunkard, uh, whether you did all these illegal stuff. You said yes to any of these, you need to see an attorney. If you said no, you're fine. If you said yes to any of from 31 to 36, you also need to see an attorney. Uh, have you ever served in U.S. Armed Forces? Now, serving in the armed forces is not, as long as it was done legally, then you're fine. Um, if it's not, if you think you have some kind of problem, then you need to see an attorney. If you said no to all these, you're fine. Um, they ask you about the military here. If you said no, you're fine. Um, if you said yes, then you need to see an attorney. Here they ask you if you're a male between the ages between your 18th and 26th birthday. So if you're between 18 and 26 years old, you need to register. Um, if you lived in the United States between when you're 18 and 26, you need to register uh, with the Select Service. If you are, you say yes, and you will put the date you register in the Select Service number. Now, if you haven't done this, I would see an attorney to get straightened out. Okay, so the next from 45 to 50 is basically, do you support the U.S. government, and are you going to you know do the oath of allegiance? In other words, if you become a citizen, are you gonna be a um, loyal to the United States? That's basically the question. So you would say yes to all of this. If you say no, you need to see an attorney. Okay. Here you would check off A if you can read and understand all the questions. If you don't, if you use the interpreter, in other words, if you can't read English, uh, then you need to use an interpreter, and you would click off B, and you would uh, have the interpreter interpret all the questions for you. And then if you used somebody else to prepare your form, it would say that you would click off here, and you would put the person's name here. So if somebody prepared the form for you, fill the application for you, then you would click off. You would put their names here. Okay. So all this is you're certifying that all the information is true, and then you would sign here and put the date of your signature. Okay. And if you did use an interpreter, you put their names here, the name of the company that the interpreter works for, their mailing address, um, the contact phone number, and the the interpreter, has to fill out this part here. It says they're fluent in English and the other language that they're fluent in, and they would sign and date here. Okay. And if you use someone to prepare your form, like an attorney, then they would put their information here. Or you use your friend to help you fill out the form, then you would put your friend's name here, their mailing address, and their phone numbers here. And here, if that person who prepared the form on your behalf, if they are attorney, then they would click off here saying that they are attorney, and then the attorney can choose this or that. If the person who prepared the form for you is not attorney, then you click off item number A. Then they would sign here and date here. Okay, this part here is, you do not complete this part here. This is during the interview that you would do this together with the U.S. official during the interview. So you would leave all this part blank. So part 16 to 18, you would not fill it out. You just leave it blank until your interview date. Okay, so that's all there is to it.